Hi, hello, my name is Gomer Joseph. I hope you've all been having a great day so far. Welcome back to another True Crime Tuesdays video. If you are new, I welcome you. Today I'll be discussing the unsolved Atlanta child murders. Before I start, this case involves missing children. I want to inform you all about 15-year-old Alora Benitez. She is Hispanic, has brown eyes, is 5'2", and weighs 100 pounds. She was last seen in Redondo Beach, California on April 17, 2019. She's believed to be with Roman Karatos and her mother, Marcelia Mercado. If you see them, you're asked not to approach, but to call the police. Either call 911, 1-800-843-5678, or the LA County Sheriff's Office, which is 1-323-890-5500. The numbers will be available in the description box. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, I'll be discussing the Atlanta child murders. Before I researched this topic, I never even heard about it until the 3-part docuseries came on Investigation Discovery. Between 1979 through 1981, all these black children in Atlanta were going missing and turning up dead. This brought so much fear for so many parents and children in the area. Around the time that this occurred, I was told by people who were alive at the time that it was big news around the country. Somehow it was sadly forgotten, which it shouldn't have been forgotten at all. Researching this, I found out how there is so much controversy and different theories surrounding these cases. Hearing what occurred in Atlanta all those years ago is absolutely insane and heartbreaking. Here we go. The first case that started it all was the disappearance and murder of 14-year-old Edward Smith. Edward Smith went by Teddy. He was last seen on July 21st, 1979, leaving with his girlfriend after they spent time at the Greenbrier skating rink. The thing is that his murder would be connected to 13-year-old Alfred Evans. Alfred went by Q. He loved playing basketball and loved to box. Q was last seen on July 25th, 1979, after Randy Joe Heath gave him a ride to a bus stop. Others have claimed to last seen him smoking weed with Teddy, but I can't see how that makes sense since Teddy went missing 5 days prior. On July 28, 1979, a man who was looking for aluminum cans discovered a decomposing body near the road he was walking on. Police were called and investigator Danny Agan discovered 2 decomposing bodies. The bodies were of Teddy and Q. Months later, on September 4th, 1979, Milton Harvey, who was 14 years old, disappeared. He was last seen outside of Citizens and Southern Bank. He was found dead on November 16, 1979, and his cause of death is unknown. On October 21, 1979, 9-year-old Yusef Bell was last seen without a shirt and shoes as he got into a blue car. One witness claimed that the driver was Yusef's father, John. Camille, who was Yusef's mother, didn't believe this witness was trustworthy. Yusef was found dead on November 8, 1979, at an abandoned school. This cause of death was strangulation. On March 4th, 1980, 12-year-old Angel Lanier disappeared. Her mother noticed that Angel came home late. Angel was someone who wouldn't have done something like this. The girl's parents rarely had to worry much about her at all, but since Angel didn't come home on time, her mother was terrified for her daughter's safety. Then the police were called. On March 10th, 1980, Angel was found tied to a tree. There were marks like a rope around her neck. What's crazy about Angel's tragedy is that before her death, she had a nightmare. She refused to tell her mother, but Angel's brother informed their mother how Angel had a nightmare that something would happen to her. Angel's mother wanted to know if someone was threatening her, but Angel wanted it to be left alone. As time went by, it seemed to the parents like no one cared about the disappearances, especially with the lack of media attention. With these murders, police saw some sort of connection. One investigator, Bob Buffington, found something sketchy about the investigation of these murders. He wrote up a letter that sent it to the major. Later on, this major threatened to assign Bob to auto theft warning watch if he received another letter. This type of behavior is something I find sketchy myself. With the deaths of these kids, rumors began to spread. There were rumors that the police were responsible or that the KKK were the murderers. I've got plenty of more theories to share. I'll discuss them later, so please bear with me. Overall, since word got out about these kids getting killed, other black children in Atlanta were terrified. On March 11, 1980, 10-year-old Jeffrey Mattis disappeared. The last time he was seen was when he was on his way to the Star Service station. Months after Jeffrey's disappearance, a girl claimed to see him get into a blue car with a light-skinned man and a dark-skinned man. Other witnesses claimed Willie Turner claimed to have seen Jeffrey in a blue Nova 2 weeks after he went missing. 2 months after his disappearance, he was found dead in the woods. On May 18, 1980, 14-year-old Eric Middlebrooks disappeared. The teen was last seen leaving home with his bike to get it fixed. The next day, police found Eric's body near a trash can. As Bob Buffington and Danny Agin were examining the body, they discovered that an injury to his head caused Eric's death, but noticed a fiber under his sneaker. Don't forget about that detail because fibers will be extremely important for this story later. The thing about Eric is that he also testified against 3 minors in a robbery case a few weeks before his disappearance, which is just insane to me. On June 9, 1980, 12-year-old Christopher Richardson went missing. Before he disappeared, he was about to go to the swimming pool with his brothers. At first, Christopher's mother didn't want him going to the pool wearing the clothes he had on. Eventually, she allowed him to go, and he was trying to catch up with his brothers, but he never caught up with them. Christopher was last seen waving at his neighbors. The boy was known as someone who was timid, so when his mother got back home from work, Christopher was nowhere to be found. She asked her other sons where their brother was, but they didn't know. So at first, she wasn't worried. Their mother just told the boys to find their brother. So the brothers were having a hard time finding Christopher, so his mother started searching as well. Because Christopher was nowhere to be found, this was when the family began to worry. As the police were investigating the disappearance, they questioned the extended family members, which aggravated Christopher's mother because she felt as if they weren't spending enough time looking for her son. For the sake of making this whole situation make sense, I'll explain what happened to Christopher Richardson later on. On June 22nd, 1980, 6-year-old LaTanya Wilson was taken from her bedroom on the second-floor apartment. That day, Amp Wiley, who was a neighbor, claimed to see an old van, 2 men and 1 female hanging near the back of the apartment, and some drama in the Wilsons' apartment. To Amp, it sounded like someone was getting a whooping and heard LaTanya's mother, Ella, yelling at someone to stop. On October 18, 1980, LaTanya's remains were found in the woods near her home, but the cause of death is unknown. 10-year-old Aaron, I believe you say his last name is Witch, was last seen on June 23, 1980. Witnesses saw him outside a grocery store getting into a blue and white Chevy with 2 black men, which is very similar to who Jeffrey Mattis was last seen with. Speaking of Jeffrey Mattis, there were kids at his school who said that they noticed how the same car would try to pick up kids at the school. A female witness saw Aaron with a 30-year-old man who had a mustache and a goatee. She said that she greeted Aaron, who greeted her back like nothing was wrong, then claimed to have seen Aaron next to the man in the car. As the two were inside the vehicle, she claimed to have seen this man do something with his hands on his lap. The following day, Aaron would be found under a bridge, and the cause of death was by suffocation. On July 6, 1980, 9-year-old Anthony Carter disappeared. Most of his life, Anthony was raised by his grandmother and had a great relationship with his cousins. On the day of his disappearance, they were playing hide-and-go-seek. Now, the kids knew all about the kids who were disappearing and were showing up dead, so they usually stayed in groups. After the cousins finished playing hide-and-go-seek, they realized that Anthony was missing. Anthony's cousin noticed a peculiar-looking man walking up the roads as the kids were playing. What happened is that the man disappeared the same time Anthony did. Don't forget what you just heard about the description of this man, because it will be important later on. Eventually, the family would search all over the place for Anthony. Unfortunately, he would be found dead behind the apartment building. It was revealed that Anthony was stabbed to death. With the disappearances and deaths of these black children rising, there was an uproar in the community. Because of the uproar, Lee Brown, who was the commissioner at the time, announced a task force on July 17, 1980. This task force was to find out who was responsible for these deaths and to stop them from happening. As time went on, people didn't believe this task force was helpful at all. On July 30th, 1980, 10-year-old Earl Terrell disappeared. The boy was last seen buying freeze pops, which I guess would be another word for popsicles, at a grocery store a block away from his home. Witnesses also noticed him crying on a street corner for some reason. The next day, a white man with a southern drawl called Earl's home, claiming that he had him and wanted $200 that following Friday, but there was never another call after that. On January 9th, 1981, Earl Terrell and Christopher Richardson were found in the woods by investigator Jim Procopio, I believe that's how you say his last name. Both bodies were missing clothes and their deaths were undetermined. What frustrates me is that Atlanta police somehow left body parts like teeth at the crime. Another thing that's strange about this situation is that though police found shotgun shells, magazines, cigarette butts, a recording tape, and fingerprints to match who someone was, the task force felt as if this wasn't a strong suspect in the case. I honestly believe more should have been done, but what's done is done. On August 20th, 1980, 12-year-old Clifford Jones disappeared. He was last seen looking for cans to sell. 4 witnesses claimed to have last seen Clifford with a man named Jamie Brooks, who years later was charged for aggravated assault and rape of another crime and would die of AIDS in jail. When I discuss the theories, I'll explain what people believe about Jamie's involvement in Clifford's death. Sadly, Clifford was found dead on August 21st, 1980. The cause of death was strangulation. Certain fibers were also found on him. On September 14th, 1980, 11-year-old Darren Glass vanished. He was last seen getting off a church bus after seeing an Atlanta Braves game. Darren lived with his foster mother, and the day he went missing, she got what she called an emergency phone call from him, but the line went dead. His foster brother claimed to know where Darren was and got calls from him in November. To this day, Darren has never been found. On October 9th, 1980, 10-year-old Charles Stevens disappeared. This boy was last seen by his neighbor, Jerome Clark. Jerome claimed to have seen him on a skateboard in front of his house, but he also noticed a man who, it sounds like Charles was trying to get this man's attention, but the man wouldn't respond. The next day, Charles' dead body was found near a trailer park. Suffocation was the cause of death, but there was also evidence of possible sexual assault and fibers found on him. Since the cases of these dead black children were growing cold, Mayor Jackson, who was the mayor of Atlanta at the time, offered a $100,000 prize. On the other hand, police were so clueless as to who could have done this, they hired a sidekick, which I don't believe should have been done in the first place. On November 1st, 1980, 9-year-old Aaron Jackson disappeared. He was last seen at a shopping center. Sadly, he was found dead the next day near a river, and the cause of his death was suffocation. On November 10th, 1980, 16-year-old Patrick Rogers disappeared. Patrick was known as Pat-Man. This teen was loved by many people he came across, and Pat-Man was someone who loved to sing. His goal was to have a music career in the future. He even dated Q Evans' cousin. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to accomplish what he wanted. He was last seen dropping his younger brother Isaac, who was 7 at the time, off at his school bus. When Pat-Man didn't show up home, his family was obviously worried. At first, police thought he ran away, which is something I can't understand when black children were constantly showing up dead in the area. Pat-Man was found dead on December 7th, 1980, near a river, and the cause of death was suffocation. Sometime after Pat-Man's death, Isaac described how his mother was so heartbroken she began to abuse drugs. There's another situation when Isaac was walking down the steps of his apartment when a man blocked his way. Isaac described this man who wore glasses and had an uneven afro and wore a suit. After this man was blocking the way, Isaac was terrified. He ran back upstairs, then banged on his neighbor's door, screaming for help. As Isaac was banging on the door, this man was calmly walking up the steps. By the grace of God, his neighbor Willie Mae opened the door. She held onto the boy as the man just looked at them 5 feet away. He eventually walked away, and don't forget about this man because he'll be important later on. Around Patman's disappearance, the FBI began to get involved, and they wanted to retrace their steps to the first disappearance, which was Edward Smith's. As these disappearances were occurring, this was when the expression of a PSA on broadcast networks began to really hit home. The public service announcement was, "It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?" With the disappearances and with the PSA, parents would not allow their children to come home late. If they would, the parents would begin to panic. On January 3rd, 1981, 14-year-old Luby Jeter disappeared. He was last seen outside a Big Star food store selling car deodorizers. The boy would get into a car, and witnesses claim to have gotten into a car with Wayne Williams. Once again, will be a very important name later on if you're unfamiliar with this case. On February 5th, 1981, Luby was found dead in the woods with most of his clothes gone. The cause of his death was strangulation. On January 22nd, 1981, 15-year-old Terry Pugh vanished. He was last seen at the Crystal restaurant. The next day, police got a call from an anonymous man stating that police should find 2 bodies near Sigmund Road. Sadly, that was where Terry's body was found. There were cuts on his elbow and bruises on his head. Dog hairs were also found on his body, and the cause of death was strangulation. 2 years later, another body was found around the same area, but it was an unknown body. To this day, I really wish the police would have been able to trace who made the anonymous call in the first place. On February 6, 1981, 12-year-old Patrick Baltazar was missing. The thing about Patrick was that he wasn't a resident in Atlanta. He actually came from Louisiana to visit his father. Patrick's family remembered him as someone who loved swimming, loved carrying his boombox, a gentleman, and a hard-working kid who worked odd jobs. As word got out about the $100,000 reward, Patrick was pretty much obsessed with getting that money. His stepmother was noticing this obsession of finding the killer, so she pleaded with Patrick's father to send him back to Louisiana for his own safety. Patrick didn't want to leave. This kid loved Atlanta so much. On the night of his disappearance, he and a friend went downtown to play arcade games. After they left the arcade, the kids were approached by a heavy-set white man in a car who offered them a ride. With the word going out about kids being murdered, Patrick felt as if this was the killer, so the boys rejected the ride. Then Patrick called the police on a payphone. The dispatcher claimed that the police would be on their way. Since the police were taking so long, Patrick's friend grew impatient and left. That was the last time Patrick was seen. Now, I've mentioned that the police claimed to be on their way, but what I'm about to say will frustrate you since it frustrates me. The police thought it was a prank call. Like, you'd think that everything going on with the missing and dead black children in Atlanta, the police would look into every situation, but not this one. What aggravates me even more is that when the police was notified by the family about Patrick's disappearance, the police wanted the family to wait 24 hours. Like, why wait 24 hours when there are countless cases of black children missing and being murdered in the area? That completely baffles me. Unfortunately, on February 13th, 1981, Patrick was found dead behind a vacant building due to strangulation, and fibers were found on him. As the disappearances and deaths were rising, Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra raised $150,000 to help pay for the investigation. Muhammad Ali donated $400,000. Former President Ronald Reagan sent George Bush Sr., who was the vice president at the time, to Atlanta to pay $3 million for the investigation. On February 19, 1981, 13-year-old Curtis Walker vanished. The kid was last seen at a gun shop looking for work, then walked to a shopping center. His body was found on March 6, 1981 by a river with only his underwear. Latent prints were found on the body and the cause of death was strangulation. On March 2, 1981, Joseph Bell, who was a 15-year-old who went by JoJo, worked at Cap'n Peg's Seafood. He was last seen playing basketball with a friend at Agnes Jones School, where LaTanya Wilson actually attended school before her death. Eugene Lester claimed that JoJo was offered a ride by a man I mentioned before, whose name is Wayne Williams. According to Eugene, JoJo entered the car and was never seen alive again. On April 19, 1981, JoJo was found dead by two bikers near a river. He only had his underwear and died by undetermined suffocation. Now, this next victim is going to have a complicated story, and I'm going to do my best not to confuse y'all because there was just too much. On March 13, 1981, 13-year-old Timothy Hill vanished. He was last seen talking with a 16-year-old girl on a sidewalk. Now, before his disappearance, his niece had claimed to see him get into a taxi as he put mud on his face. Let me explain this so-called mud. There was a known sex offender in the area named Tom Terrell. People would call him Uncle Tom, and his house was known for people as Uncle Tom's cabin. Terrell would keep a bucket that looked like mud so people could get high. A 34-year-old man named Frankie Mealing claimed to have raped Timothy at Uncle Tom's cabin and that Timothy stayed there the night. Now, I'm not sure if Mealing got arrested for this. I mean, I hope he did though, but a 15-year-old who knew Yusuf Bell claimed that a man named Larry Hill, who was Mealing's roommate, took him and Timothy to rape them. This same 15-year-old witness claimed that someone told him Timothy Hill and other bodies would be found in a place called, I believe you call it Chattahoochee. Long behold, Timothy's body was found at this place on March 30th, 1981 with nothing but his underwear on. The cause of his death was suffocation. 17-year-old William Barrett, I believe that's how you say his last name, who went by Billy Starr, disappeared on May 11th, 1981. Billy Starr was last seen at Glen Housing Community Center to pay a bill for his mother. A neighbor saw the teen enter a white car with a man who carried a purse. His aunt, Mary Harris, and his cousin said that Wayne Williams was at their house the day of the disappearance. The day after Billy Starr vanished, his body was found in the woods. Strangulation was the cause of death. Animal hairs and a white undercoat were found on the body. This was when the disappearances and murders of the children seemed to stop. But there were cases of mentally challenged men who vanished and were murdered. Their names were Eddie Duncan, Larry Rogers, Michael McIntosh, and Jimmy Payne. Police began to investigate people dropping off things off a bridge. One night, police heard a splash. They eventually followed a white vehicle. Once this vehicle was stopped, long behold, they found the mystery man I kept mentioning, Wayne Williams, who was 23 years old at the time. Here's Wayne Williams' background. He was an aspiring music producer. This guy was actually well known in the community. He did have a radio station, but it failed and it caused his parents to go bankrupt. Once Wayne was stopped, they asked him if they knew what he was stopping them for. Wayne knew they were stopping him because of the deaths of the children in the area. As the police searched the car, they found gloves, flashlight, and a nylon cord. Since there wasn't any evidence that he was involved in any of the murders, police let him go. Eventually, there was a body found near a river, the same area where Wayne Williams was stopped around the time police heard the splash. The body was of 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater, who was killed by strangulation. Police found fibers that seemed similar to the child victims. On June 3, 1980, Wayne Williams was brought in for questioning. As police searched Wayne's house, they found fibers that connected him to the victims, fibers such as the ones belonging to a German Shepherd and a bedspread. On June 21st, 1981, Wayne Williams was arrested for not only the murder of Nathaniel Cater, but also the death of 27-year-old John Porter, who was found stabbed to death on a sidewalk. When word got out about Williams' arrest, people wondered if he served as someone who would take the fall for all of the children who were murdered in Atlanta. But he was also recognized by two individuals. Jimmy, who was Anthony Carter's cousin, recognized him as the man who disappeared the same time as his cousin. Isaac, Patman's younger brother, recognized Williams as the man who intimidated him on the steps of the apartment that one night. As the trial began, prosecutors not only were charging him for Nathaniel and John's death, but they also wanted him to go down for the murders of the children. Most of the evidence used in the trial was the fiber. At first, the jury didn't really seem to get it. Williams also seemed like a timid guy who would never hurt anyone. Eventually, the prosecutor wanted the court to see the real Wayne Williams. This prosecutor was telling Williams that he was responsible for the deaths of all those children in Atlanta and the two men he was charged for killing. Williams would snap on the prosecutor, which basically shook the whole court, causing the jury to wonder if he was really a murderer. On February 26, 1982, there were armed police all over the place since it was the day of the verdict. The jury decided that Williams was guilty. Williams was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life, but he wasn't charged for any of the children's deaths, yet the cases of those children's disappearances and deaths were closed. Parents felt as if their children's murders weren't well investigated, especially since they were never got the chance to go to trial for their kids' death. I honestly don't blame them. It seemed like Atlanta officials wanted these murders to be forgotten. Let me tell you, like that, they pretty much succeeded. Now is the time for the theories. Theory number 1, the KKK were involved. Like I mentioned before, earlier on, people believed that the KKK was responsible for these black kids vanishing and ending up dead. I mean, it was the late 1970s and early 1980s. The civil rights movement and Jim Crow was still fresh in a lot of people's minds. Even certain civil rights activists' deaths were still unsolved. There's one story of a KKK member named Charles Sanders who believed killed Luby Jeter. Supposedly, Luby scratched up his car, and Sanders was heard to have said that he wanted the kid dead for scratching the car and that he would choke him to death. With the fact that Luby was strangled to death, it doesn't really help Sanders look innocent. Even the Georgia Bureau of Investigation were investigating the KKK, but the investigation steadily dropped. People believe that it was dropped to prevent a race war in Atlanta. There's also the theory that Tom Terrell, aka Uncle Tom, was involved with a lot of the deaths. People have claimed to see like 10 of the dead boys at his house from time to time when those 10 boys were alive. Theory number 3 is that Jamie Brooks killed Clifford Jones. Emmanuel Williams, who was Clifford's brother, believes this. He was told how someone held Clifford hostage in the laundromat where his body was found. Inside this laundromat, Emmanuel believes that Clifford was raped, beaten, placed a rope around the boy's neck to kill him, and how someone saw this occur through the doorway. For some strange reason, it took police 2 years to question Brooks, but police didn't charge him. Police felt like one of the witnesses were exaggerating, but yet there were 3 other people who claimed to have last seen Clifford with Brooks. The 4th theory is that since a number of the kids had missing organs, their organs were used for scientific experiments. Theory 5 is that there was someone who admitted to killing Angel Lanier. Even with this confession, police couldn't touch the supposed suspect since this suspect was white and rich. Here's the last theory. Williams is innocent of all of his, convicted crimes and alleged crimes. The weirdest thing about this theory is that he claimed to have been involved with the CIA and how the CIA got upset with him for leaving a mission in a dying African village. So the CIA framed him for the murders. Yet, when Williams was asked about this, he refused to talk about it in the interview. On February of 2005, Williams claimed his innocence on Frank Ski's radio show. Isaac, who was Patman's younger brother, knew he saw Williams that night and believed Williams was responsible for his older brother's death. He asked the radio station not to give Williams a platform, especially when the public support for Williams began to rise. Overall, with all the controversy, with all the different theories out there, we can't forget the tragedy. At least 20 children lost their lives, and to this day, their cases have been unsolved. Around the time, their cases seem to be unimportant to investigate because of their social class and the color of their skin, which is absolutely wrong. Like, every human being is made in the image of God. It shouldn't matter how much money they have or what their ethnicity is. Justice should be done for any individual who goes missing and or is found dead. Stories like this is exactly why exposure is highly important in a missing persons case. Whenever you see a missing person on social media, don't just scroll down or don't just tap away. Back then, the parents of those children didn't even have social media to help find out where their children were or to help them find out who is responsible for their deaths, which is why it's very important to share whenever you get word about a missing person. It's pretty much like a slap in the face to the family members who are desperately searching for them. I pray that one day justice will be done for these unsolved cases. At least God knows exactly what happened. The God I serve, the God of the Bible, is a God of justice, and he will make sure that justice is done. That's all I've got to say. If you've got any thoughts on these cases, please leave your thoughts in the comment section. If you'd like for me to discuss a certain true crime case, please feel free to let me know. If you like this video, please hit the like button. I upload true crime videos every Tuesday, so please feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me. Don't forget to click that bell to get a notification of when the next video is up. Thank you for taking the time in your day to watch this video. I'll see you all next week for True Crime Tuesdays. I'll talk to you all later.